Is Drake Maye the New England Patriots' next golden ticket for the future of the franchise? We talk about that and so much more coming up next during this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on Locked On NFL and making us your first listen each and every single day. Free and available on all podcasting platforms and includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can follow along as well. We do 5 days a week of daily NFL content here every single weekday. So be sure to check us out anywhere you prefer to watch or listen to your podcasts. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side and I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Plenty to dive into today on Locked On NFL. The draft has come and gone, but we still are talking some draft storylines today. In the first segment, I do want to talk with Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots. I thought it was really important to have Mike back on the show to talk about Drake Maye and if he is the next golden ticket for the Patriots franchise. Also, a veteran over New England getting an extension, so we'll talk about that. Then in the second part of the show, we'll have Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers back to talk about Joe Alt over Malik Nabers. Was that a mistake for Los Angeles? And finally, Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. Ezekiel Elliott is back in Dallas to talk with Marcus about that move and a lot more. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots. The New England Patriots secured Drake Maye with the number 3 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. Here to talk about that and much more New England Patriots talk, it is Mike Debate, the host of Locked On Patriots. And Mike, the Patriots love to stay in the news. They've been creeping around here. We've talked a lot. It's been a great opportunity to talk to you a lot here on Locked On NFL. But the draft going the way a lot of people thought, with Caleb Williams going 1 to Chicago, Jaden Daniels going number 2 to Washington, that left the Patriots with a choice, and they chose Drake Maye at number 3. Mike, do you think that this was the right pick for the Patriots, and do you think that he can be the next future of the franchise for New England moving forward?
Yeah, Kevin, I do. I believe this was the right move for the New England Patriots. Look, he's been described, and we've talked about this before right here on these airwaves, as being an ideal fit in Alex Van Pelt's offense. Drake Maye has all the tools he needs to succeed. He just needs to be coached, I think, into his ability. And if that happens, the Patriots have got themselves a guy that they can lean on long term. Drake can make any throw required of him on the field. I don't think there's any question about that. This kid is absolutely capable of navigating the field. And once again, I don't think he gets maybe enough credit for his ability to navigate the field as maybe he deserves, but he can do that and direct traffic with the best of them. Absolutely, without any question, athleticism. This kid has got it there as well. When the play breaks down, he's got the agility, he's got the instinct to turn some of those off-script plays that we know he's known and loved for into big games. So with that regard, with a guy like Alex Van Pelt that loves to utilize the running game, the ground game, to open up play action, and then utilize the quarterback's ability to take deep shots down the field, yeah, it's going to be hard to really replicate what Drake Maye can give you in that regard. So while there are still questions about his temperance, whether or not he's going to be able to lay off the big play, I've expressed concern several times on Locked On Patriots and right here on Locked On NFL about his ability to handle pressure. That pressure to sack rate ratio is still a concern for me. All of the intangibles, when they add up, puts the scales decisively in Drake Maye's favor. I think he was the right choice and the good choice for the New England Patriots.
And when you look at what the Patriots did over the offseason, Mike, before the draft, they bring in Jacoby Brissett to be that veteran.
Right.
I mean, you spend the number 3 overall pick on a guy who anticipate that guy starting, but is there going to be any sort of competition between Maye and Brissett? Is Maye going to have to win that job, or is this, a shoo-in that Maye's going to start week 1?
No, I think there's going to be a competition. And quite honestly, I really wouldn't be surprised to see Jacoby Brissett get the start for the season. Look, I think New England saw what happened with Mac Jones 2 years ago. and they realized that maybe Mac might have been better off holding a clipboard or holding a tablet and looking and learning the NFL nuances before being thrust into the role right away. Mac had a pretty decent rookie season. He had a very good supporting cast around him. When that cast broke down and he didn't have the coaching support that he needed, you saw difficulties and you saw problems. And unfortunately, it led to Mac's demise here in New England. They don't want to make that same mistake with Drake Maye. I think Drake Maye is more advanced at this point in his career than Mac was when he came in at number 15 overall in 2021. But at the same time, you also want Drake to grow into his greatness. And I don't think he's quite there yet. Jacoby Brissett is the ideal quarterback to be able to mentor a young quarterback, a guy that's played with the best. He knows what to do in that situation. And he's got a very good relationship with Alex Van Pelt, and he can show him the nuances of this offense, help him succeed. So, yeah, I think you're probably looking at a little bit of a competition, and it wouldn't shock me to see Jacoby Brissett win it right out of the gate. But make no mistake about it, this is Drake Maye's team, and it probably will be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and speaking of the rest of the draft, Drake Maye was obviously the headliner for the Patriots, but there were more picks than New England's made throughout the rest of the draft. How did you like the rest of what New England did over the course of the draft, Mike?
I really liked what New England did. I thought that they addressed their needs, and I think they did it adequately. Look, you've got two guys on the receiving core now that can add elements that the Patriots did not have last season. What they hoped they were getting in Devontae Parker is now what I believe they will be getting in Jalen Polk, a guy that can absolutely run the route, get out, make sure that he's going to secure the ball at the point of attack. He's excellent at the catch point, doesn't necessarily have the breakaway speed that a lot of his competitors in this draft have, but what he does have is a knowledge of the field and a natural leadership ability that I think the Patriots are really going to navigate towards. Jalen is someone that's consistently touted by his teammates. That's big. The Patriots are very big on character. Elliott Wolf, Gerard Mayo, they want to continue that tradition. They will in Jalen Polk. And Javon Baker, I think, is already endearing himself to Patriots Nation, saying, "Get the popcorn ready," and a few other, catchphrases that he's dropping in there. This kid, explosive ability, and I think he can be an interesting pick. And bottom line, I think what the Patriots did on the offensive line is not as bad as people are making it out to be. I think Caden Wallace has the ability, the athleticism to get reps at left tackle. If he doesn't work out, you do have Chuck Okorafor that is capable of playing that position. So the Patriots do have veterans there, but it's worth it to see if this rookie can grow into it because the talent is unquestionably there. And Layden Robinson may be one of my more underrated picks for the Patriots this year at guard. He is the perfect type of guard to play in an Alex Van Pelt system. That pulling guard, he's definitely someone that can do it. He's at his best in that situation. I like that pick as well. So overall, I think the New England Patriots did a very good job of planting seedlings for what could be a very good team in another couple of years.
Yeah, and it's not just about getting new talent in, Mike, but obviously retaining some of the old talent, and the Patriots certainly did that with the news that Christian Barmore, the stud defensive tackle for the Patriots, ended up getting a nice new 4-year deal with a maximum of $92 million here. Now, you had kind of hinted before that this was a player to keep your eye on as a potential extension candidate. I think a very well-deserved deal for Barmore. Were you shocked by the timing? Were you surprised by the money? What was your reaction when this deal first came down?
Well, when you first hear $92 million in total, you're a little surprised by the number. But when you actually take a look at this, believe it or not, Kevin, it was a relatively team-friendly deal, especially for 2024. Christian's base salary this coming season is going to be $1.8 million, got a $4.4 million signing bonus, and a $6.3 million cap hit. For someone of his caliber, that is not necessarily insurmountable. What the Patriots also did was build in incentives starting in 2025, right up until the end of the 2028 season, where he's eligible to earn up to $2 million in incentives as well. So that number, that final number of $92 million, is the culmination of all of that. When you break it down, it's a little bit more of a palatable $84 million worth of Christian Barmore. And bottom line, I think where he earns it is on the field. This guy absolutely will go out there and give you 110%. And he's so important to the way that defensive line operates, not just from his prowess and being able to defend against the run and against the pass, but him taking the double team and taking a lot of pressure off of the edge rushers someone you know very well, and Matthew Judon, very happy that Christian Barmore is going to be back in the fold and for the foreseeable future. When he takes the double team, edge rushers get open one-on-one, and that's where they can go to work and get after the quarterback. Didn't see that enough last year. I think Christian's going to be heavily motivated to do it, and it's going to mean big things for the Pats defense.
Mike is great as always, and for more on Mike, you can check him out over the Locked On Patriots podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up with the second part of the show, we're talking with Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers. They took Joe Alt over Malik Nabers. Was that the right decision or a mistake? Stay tuned for that plan to talk about here on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any money $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Obviously, for those who don't know, I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy, and they took a tough loss in game one to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who I think are a heck of a team. I'm worried they might go down 2-0, but if you want to bet Nikola Jokic props, Anthony Edwards props, maybe how long the series is going to go, get over to FanDuel and do that right now. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. We just talked about Drake Maye and the New England Patriots. Now let's talk about Joe Alt and the Los Angeles Chargers. Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers will be talking with us about the decision to draft Joe Alt over Malik Nabers and a lot more now. The Los Angeles Chargers beefed up their offensive line during the 2024 NFL Draft. They add Joe Alt here to talk about that. And the Chargers wide receiver. Maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not. Dan Wade here of Locked On Chargers is going to tell us whether it's a problem or not. But Dan, let's start off first with Joe Alt. He's the pick for the Chargers at number 5. And it felt like for a lot of people after Marvin Harrison Jr. went at number 4, it was, all right, well, now the Chargers are in this big spot. Do they go offensive line? Do they go wide receiver? They choose the offensive line. Let's talk about Joe Alt as a prospect first here, Dan. What do you like about Joe Alt, and what can he bring to this Chargers team?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. I mean, maybe obviously we should have seen this coming all along, right, with Jim Harbaugh and just, what he wants to do with this team. And I mean, that was one of the most kind of interesting things about the hiring of Jim Harbaugh was just like, what is the transformation going to look like? Because I think the 2023 version of the Chargers was so far away from what a Jim Harbaugh team normally looks like, right? Like a trenches team and all of that. And Joe Alt fills that need, right? It's a statement pick with your 5th overall pick, taking the best tackle in this draft class, and a draft class that was filled with really good tackles, right? That's all we heard about was how good this tackle class was, and he was the best among them. I mean, I think what you're getting is just potentially with Joe Alt, I mean, with his athletic ability, the fact that he's only 21 years old, the fact that you have Rashawn Slater already on the left side, if he can transition to that right side, and I think his athleticism, the fact that he was a former tight end and used to line up on both sides of the line of scrimmage, the fact that he came into Notre Dame as a right tackle, all leads you to believe that he should be able to do it. Potentially the best tackle duo in the NFL. And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can look at trying to help your quarterback in Justin Herbert. And I think one of the best ways to do it is, hey, if we protect him, then he will be able to elevate the players around him. And I think Joe Alt as a prospect is good enough to do that. I mean, when you watch him, it's really hard as you're trying to come up with the pros and cons list to find cons, right? Even if I wanted to not like him, it made it very, very hard to not like him just because he is a mountain of a man, almost 6'9", moves like a dude who's much smaller than that. Never really gets pushed back into the quarterback, never really had much problem in pass protection. I think as far as the running game goes, has the ability to really improve the Chargers running game, which from day one, that's what Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman and Joe Ortiz told us they wanted to do. Protect Justin Herbert, give him a good running game. I think he helps in the protection of it, hands down. I think he'll be a boost to the running game as well.
Yeah, it definitely does, to me at least. Dan, I'll start up front for an offense. I know you've talked about that before on here, but that doesn't mean pass catchers and wide receivers aren't important. So when you look at the decision, again, it was offensive lineman and Joe Alt versus wide receiver there in Malik Nabers, and maybe Rome Odunze if you liked him, although I had Nabers above him personally.
Yeah.
But do you feel like the Chargers made a mistake. Now, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and you had said
Yeah.
it was, but now that it's actually happened, do you still believe it was a mistake for the Chargers to take Joe Alt over Malik Nabers just in terms of getting Justin Herbert, that potentially elite weapon, at a spot where you're hoping the Chargers don't pick again?
Yeah, and I stand by that. If it was me, I would have taken Malik Nabers. I thought just as prospects, he was the better of the prospects. Even if he wasn't the best wide receiver, I still had him graded above where I had Joe Alt as, even if I think that Joe Alt is, one of the better tackle prospects to come out over the last few seasons. I felt like this was a draft. I mean, you don't have to go too much further back than last year, right? Where like there wasn't this type of talent at the top of last year's draft. The Ravens were a part of it. The Chargers were a part of it. The run of 4 receivers that went off the board in the 20s last year, but there was no top 20 wide receivers. So this was a very special class when you have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers and Rome Odunze, all guys that you could make the argument for at 5. And so to pass up on that, it definitely hurt. Now, that being said, I like the way the Chargers draft rounded out. I would have taken the explosive wide receiver. I don't know if Malik Nabers would have been a fit for what Jim Harbaugh specifically wants to do and what this direction is. And what they said is, hey, we took the best guy that fits the Chargers best. And maybe that's true. Maybe Malik Nabers wasn't a fit for what the Chargers are building here. That's hard to say, and we'll kind of see how it all plays out. To me, he was a special receiver that would have been the number one receiver in most draft classes, and he ended up just being in the same one as Marvin Harrison Jr. But I did really like the way that the Chargers made a priority to go get a guy, right? And I liked the guy that they got with Ladd McConkey in the second round. I think the argument to be made there is, if you wanted to go tackle and wide receiver going into the draft, you're going to get a better combination taking Joe Alt at 5, right? And getting Ladd McConkey at the top of the second round than if you had gone Malik Nabers and then took a second round tackle. I don't think you should necessarily pigeonhole yourself into, hey, I'm taking these 2 positions in the first 2 rounds of the draft, but the Chargers obviously had big enough needs where it felt like that's what they wanted to do. So having them come up and get Ladd McConkey, who I think is a really, really good prospect, I think I like the way it turned out more than I thought I would. And I think that's the nice thing about it is Joe Alt as a prospect is so hard to dislike. Ladd McConkey as a prospect is pretty hard to dislike as well, with just the wide kind of tool belt that he has as far as winning and why you think his game will translate to the NFL level. So I think when you're looking at the decision, I would have still gone with Malik Nabers. I understand them kind of looking big picture, though. Let's see how the rest of the draft plays out. If we won't be able to get a tackle of this quality in round 2, and we still should have a pretty good receiver to pick in round 2, and that's kind of how it fell to them.
And you mentioned Ladd McConkey, them going up and getting him in round 2. But Dan, how'd you like the rest of the Chargers draft outside of Joe Alt with McConkey included in that bunch?
I liked it a lot. I think the one thing that you saw outside of a couple picks was the Chargers finding value throughout the draft, at least in the perceived value of where the consensus board lands and where, the Chargers have picked in the past, especially under Tom Telesco. I mean, the Raiders ended up getting Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers Johnson, a very, very good duo, 2 guys I was very high on. And I had said in the moment, like, dang it sucks to see that go to a division rival. At the same time, the 3rd round is coming up, and Tom Telesco will probably pick someone that we've never heard of. And sure enough, he went with Delmar Glaze in the 70s, who was like a consensus 155th pick or something like that. So it was nice that he didn't try to get too cute with it. In round 3, when it came around, the Chargers ended up getting Junior Colson, who was my favorite linebacker in this draft and made a ton of sense because of the transition to linebacker to the NFL is so tough. Having him go to his actual defense, right? Having him keep his defensive coordinator, I think, is going to be such a huge part in that transition to the NFL level. And the other thing is, it felt like the draft had a theme. Like I talked about before, I wanted to see what this experiment looked like, turning the Chargers into a team that looked like a team that Jim Harbaugh would run. And we saw that theme throughout the draft. You saw tough, physical players that aren't afraid to do the dirty work, guys with all high motors, all kind of, there was one common denominator kind of through all these guys. It was just like the toughness, the grit, a little bit of nastiness as well. Really, assignment sound football players. And it was nice to kind of see it all come together. And it's like, okay, this is what this new regime is looking for. All these guys kind of fit the puzzle that he's building here.
Be sure to check out Dan over on the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up, still a lot to talk about here on the show. Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys will join us to talk about Ezekiel Elliott back in Dallas, the Cowboys draft, and a lot more playing to get to here on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much more good stuff in this game. Monopoly Go, you can team it with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can share with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it for now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostreicher still rocking out with you here. Again, really appreciate everybody for tuning in today, making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every single day. Be sure to subscribe in video form and audio form for 5 days a week of NFL content. Thank you to the everydayers who tune in each and every day. If it's your first time into the channel or show, welcome in. Hopefully you're enjoying the NFL content. If you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back. Let's talk with Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys now. The Cowboys signing Zeke Elliott. They had a draft too. We'll talk about all that with Marcus now. Dallas Cowboys bringing back a familiar face at the running back position in Zeke Elliott. Here to talk about that with me and a lot more Dallas Cowboys is Marcus Mosher, one of the hosts over at Locked On Cowboys. And Marcus, I don't know if Zeke was Dallas's plan G at running back, but here we are. They really didn't have a ton of other options. The draft now come and gone. So Zeke back in Dallas. What were your expectations for the running back position for Dallas heading into the offseason? And do you like the fact that they brought back Zeke, or is this just like a last worst resort for you?
All right, let's start with the plan. The plan always was to spend less money at the running back position than what they've done over the last 5 years, right? They gave Ezekiel Elliott the contract extension in 2019, which they're still paying for now. By the way, this is the last year of the Zeke contract extension, which is absolutely wild. And then they had Tony Pollard last year on the franchise tag that paid him $10 million. Now, the Cowboys knew that they were going to be likely worse at running back, but they had to get cheaper. So I actually agree with that plan. Like, you're paying so many other positions, picking one and going cheap there is the correct strategy. There were a couple running backs in free agency the Cowboys were interested in. Zach Moss being one of them, but Zach Moss went for more money than they anticipated, which was $4 million a year, just to show you where the Cowboys' budget was at the running back position. And then in the draft, there were a couple guys they really liked, but they kind of got into a spot where the running backs they liked were off the board at the spots that they wanted, and they were never going to reach on running back. So yes, this in some ways it went according to plan at the running back position, but they were really hoping to grab a starter sometime in the first 2 days of the draft. Didn't happen, and that's how we got to Zeke.
It is crazy. I don't know anybody was anticipating this right now, but Marcus, can you kind of walk everybody through this state of Dallas's running back room? Is Zeke coming back to be a bell cow? Do they have other options? I mean, what does it look like in the Dallas running back room right now?
Yeah, it's not great. So let's talk about the Zeke thing. Zeke is like everybody's favorite movie. Like, you love when it first came out, and then the sequel was pretty good, not quite as good as the first one, and then the third movie, the trilogy part of it, just makes you sad. And I think that's kind of where we're at with the Zeke part. The Cowboys had really no other options. They determined he was the best option available when it came to J.K. Dobbins, Dalvin Cook, and Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt. And I actually kind of agree with them. He obviously knows this roster and this offense better than any of those other guys. I think he's going to help out in pass pro, and I think that's the big thing, right? They're going to likely be starting 2 rookie offensive linemen, including a rookie left tackle and Tyler Guyton. So you bring in the guy that you feel best about in pass pro. But as for the actual running back, like the runners, I think it's going to be a combination of Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, maybe some Deuce Vaughn, some Hunter Lipke, maybe matched in there. Royce Freeman was another free agent they signed. It's not great. It's not a great backfield, but if there's one position in the NFL like you can solve in the summer or even early in the season, it is the running back spot.
Right. And I think too, Marcus, does this have some sort of level to do with just how the Tony Pollard situation unfolded this past year? I mean, you have a guy, get him on the franchise tag, showed potential in those first couple of years for Dallas, but it just didn't really go according to plan. What went on with Tony Pollard last season? And do you agree with the decision to let him walk?
I actually think Tony Pollard's season was pretty good last year. Now, the first half of the year, it was clear that he just didn't have the same explosiveness after suffering that injury against the 49ers. But down the stretch and into the playoffs, I thought he looked like the same old Tony Pollard. The issue is, I don't think the Cowboys ever wanted to commit big money to Tony Pollard and money beyond like the 2024, 2025 season. He got a better offer with the Titans. They moved on. It happens. I kind of think that's the way you should maybe treat the running back position. Get 4, 5, 6 years and then move on. They love Tony Pollard. They love how he grew as a player. They just decided it was a time for a different philosophy in Dallas when it came to the running back position.
Now, you mentioned the draft a bit earlier with the running backs, Marcus, but Dallas, they ended up securing Tyler Guyton in the first round of the 2024 draft. More offensive line depth came throughout. How did you like Dallas's class, particularly Guyton?
Yeah, I thought they had a very sound strategy, right? They wanted to rebuild their trenches, and that started with Tyler Guyton. They moved down from pick 24 to pick 29, picked up a third-round pick, selected Guyton, who I wasn't the biggest fan of at 24 just because he is such a project, but the fact that they could move down, pick up that additional draft capital made a lot of sense. They drafted Marshawn Nealand, a pass rusher from Western Michigan in round 2. It was a sneaky need for the Cowboys with DeMarcus Lawrence in his final year of his deal. Dorrance Armstrong gone in free agency. Dante Fowler gone as well. And then I love the Cooper Beebe selection from Kansas State. That is your starting center. Not the sexiest draft, not a draft that's going to get everybody talking, on all the websites, giving the Cowboys an A+, but it felt like a draft that they needed to have, and they went out and did it.
Yeah, really strong offensive line class. I think Dallas took advantage of that 100%. But with the Dallas state of the roster, Marcus, where they were at the end of last season versus where they are now, do you think the roster's better? Do you think it's worse? Do you think it's kind of a push? How would you kind of evaluate Dallas's offseason so far?
Oh, I've got no doubt that the roster is worse than it was last year. You were just never going to be able to keep all of these players, including Tyron Smith, who had an outstanding year. They know it's worse, despite what everybody's telling you. They know it's worse. Now, what I will say, it's a younger roster that's going to be relying on a lot of rookies and second-year players. Just because the roster is worse now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worse by the time we get to November and December. We'll have to see how things shake out, but make no mistake about it, this team right now on paper is worse.
And do you feel like there are any other areas they can add? Obviously, there's another wave of free agency coming with the comp pick formula now no longer being in effect. So we're starting to see those moves come down the pipeline. What other needs does Dallas have right now?
I mean, obviously running back is going to be a spot that they monitor all summer long. Like, could they be interested in a Miles Sanders or Tyler Algier or Damian Pierce? I think so. But the one spot that I do expect them to add a veteran at some point is on the defensive line. They have a big need at defensive tackle. They probably have the worst defensive tackle depth in the league right now. So could a Linval Joseph or that type of player interest them this offseason? I think so. Keep an eye out on interior defensive line.
And now speaking of the NFC East, quickly to wrap up, Marcus, obviously with the Commanders getting the Dan Quinn staff in there, you have the Eagles after their collapse last year, and then obviously the Giants. With Dallas in there, where do you kind of slot them in right now post-draft, and what's the state of the NFC East to you?
It's really interesting because as bad as things played out last year at the end of the playoffs, this team still won the NFC East, right? And it does feel like as long as the Cowboys have a healthy Dak Prescott, you're probably going to win double-digit games, and you're probably going to contend for the NFC East title. I know that the Eagles on paper look a lot better than the Cowboys. The Cowboys have fared very well against the Eagles whenever they have a healthy Dak. To me, I still think Philadelphia and Dallas are 1-2, 2-1, however you want to mention it. And then I think Washington and the Giants are still a long way away. I know there's a lot of excitement about Dan Quinn, but man, that roster still has a lot of needs. So I would be shocked, Kevin, if it's not the Cowboys or the Eagles winning the NFC East.
Marcus is awesome. Be sure to check him out over at Locked On Cowboys. That podcast is, of course, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.